Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to After Wine School. I am Keith Wallace. This is Alana Zerbe. Hey.
Hey.
Fantastic. Today, we're talking about California. We're talking about the history of California, the rise, the fall, the rise, the fall, the rise, the fall, the fall and the rise, and the fall of California.
And the rise again.
And
the
yes,
rise.
and always the
rise.
Oh,
yes.
Sorry. Yes. It's going to be fun. There's going to be a lot of scuttlebutt in this. This isn't going to be the history that we teach in our sommelier classes. It's going to be a little more fun than that. It's going to be a lot more fun.
Yes, my class is level 3 at the National Wine School's online sommelier certification program. In that class, we give you very solid information, very good data-driven information. This is going to be a little more fun, a little more of the hidden history of Napa. Some highs, some lows, but lots of fun to talk about.
Folks, let's just start in the beginning. Before this is even the United States, California is really technically part of Spain. And you have Spanish missionaries planting grapes. One grape in particular, the mission grape. But now that has most all but disappeared now. But this was the first. And then there came a second wave of wine. Now we're actually we are now fully ensconced in the United States. This is after Revolution. We are now a country. We are now in the middle of the gold rush, 1849, the 49ers, right? And what you have is a massive population of people moving into Sonoma and a little bit into Napa as well for the gold rush. These communities are starting to be built, but what you also need is you need wine. Not surprisingly, if you're digging, panning for gold, you're going to need some booze. So this wine was specifically being made for those who were panning for gold. And not long after, right, you have the guy who is, I think of as the man. He's the great-grandfather of the wine trade in Northern California. And I'm always going to butcher his name. Haraszthy, as I think is how I pronounce his name.
Here's the deal. I'll do my best. I believe it's Augustine Haraszthy. If you it's close enough that people will know what you were talking about.
Yes.
When I teach Augustine Haraszthy in my class, when it comes to the final in the essay exam, I do let the students just write the count.
All right.
We all know who we're talking about.
All right. It's going to be the count.
The count.
All right. So the count, what he did was fascinating. First off, what he did was he actually went to Europe to collect samples of grapevines. And he didn't just bring back like 1 or 2 or 10 or 100. I think it was like 100,000 different plants brought back to plant. He starts making wine. He's involved in the wine trade. He does some significant things. And in fact, the winery Buena Vista in Sonoma, that's his winery. His original vineyards are still there. You can still go to those vineyards and say, oh, this is the origin. This is the place it all started. But then the dude does disappear. There is a lot of questions about finance and money, who owed what. Money in coffers definitely went missing. And he definitely ended up in Central America, and he fell into a pit of alligators. I think it was alligators. Yeah, and his estate does say that he was owed this money that he took. But we don't know, because we can't ask him, because he's in the belly of a long-dead alligator.
He lived a good life.
He
However
did.
It ended. He
exciting,
yes.
Interesting. And I love this is the story, the origin history of American wine on the West Coast. It's perfect. It's perfect.
Well, it's hard to segue into phylloxera after that story. But that is the next major event after really the settlement of Northern California as the unofficial wine capital of California starting in the 1860s. Shortly thereafter, starting in the 1880s, we get the first wave of phylloxera to hit California.
Yes, we do.
So phylloxera was a louse, an aphid, that originally lived on a North American rootstock. This rootstock had made its way to Europe in the mid-19th century, had decimated vineyards throughout Europe, and it eventually made its way back to this new wine region of California. At this time, Sonoma and Napa started to become rivals. Originally, we mentioned the Count, his vineyard was in Sonoma, so that's the first official winery. But quickly thereafter, we have the Charles Krug winery, and then Inglenook follows. And so this Napa-Sonoma rivalry starts. Now, Heath, why do you think Napa reigned supreme ultimately between these two over the 20th century?
I just think that it's just easier to get there. They're competitors largely because of San Francisco. Like, you're competing against your local market. Wine regions have always done that. You know, if you're in Sonoma, you're not competing with other Sonoma wineries. You actually are banded together. Like, you see yourself as one wine region doing one thing. So you're not really competing with your neighbors, which is actually the best thing about the wine trade is your neighbors are your partners, not your enemy. But who your enemy is another wine region. So so Sonoma always was dogging on Napa, Napa dogging on Sonoma. And even though Sonoma is actually more variable and that you can produce many more kinds of wine, but Napa is actually much more linear. So when they started building highways, roads, it just made Napa much easier access from San Francisco. It's actually much harder. Like, you can get to like the bottom of Sonoma, but then it's kind of a bear to get all the way through. I think it's just transportation.
It's interesting how infrastructure often plays a role in which regions become ascendant over others.
Doesn't it though? Yeah. It really is. And I think actually, like, if you could track the development of highways and roads, you would see that actually having a massive effect. But then comes the next big drop, which is Prohibition. Now, we have a whole episode talking about Prohibition. Absolutely fantastic. Go listen. The only thing I would say, one thing, is that the people who survived, the wineries that survived, and this is important for anybody, like, how do you survive when your entire market disappears? Like, this is a business issue. What they did was they actually didn't just make wine. They actually aggregated wine and sold in bulk. The Gallos, they did that. They sold wine in bulk. Now, there's another family that were also a winemaking family. What they focused on instead was actually transportation, getting wine from Northern California to the East Coast, where most of it was sold, and throughout the country. And that was the Mondavi family. So what you saw was winery families going into other parts of the economy to bolster production and to stay in the game. And this is what you really have to do. Small wineries may fail if they don't diversify in times like this. And this is an important story. Whenever there's a downside, whenever things go, like the economy falters, you may have to get into other parts of the industry. And to be honest, that's what we did. What I did in the beginning of the wine school, we expanded the wine school from being just like offering classes to actually starting to run sommelier and winemaking programs eventually. Like, we started doing other things because you have to adapt to the marketplace.
Right. And so as you're reallocating resources to a completely new business model, a lot of the knowledge about fine winemaking is lost. Families, they were winemaking families, but their focus had to be on a different core part of the business. And so the reputation of wine suffered tremendously after Prohibition in California. There were so many hundreds of wineries that were lost. And so the reputation is really in shambles after Prohibition.
And now the American palate is also not there. Like, they're not drinking wine anymore. They haven't been drinking wine for over a decade. But when they start drinking wine again, what they're looking for is very low cost, sweet wines. You know, this is the era of the jug wine. So this is where you have, this is the worst wine in American history. It's also my favorite moment in American wine history completely. Not because of the wine quality, but because of the marketing and how people saw it. Wine actually did at this point become for everybody, right? It was cheap, it was sweet, it was easy to get. And this is also when you started seeing in the 40s and the 50s television advertising. And oh my God, it is fantastic. Anyone wants to spend a beautiful half an hour of your life to waste it, like, stay off of TikTok, go find yourself the Italian Swiss colony ads. So this was one of the biggest jug wine companies. And this is where you see things like, let's pronounce it the way they would, Chablis being produced, or American champagne, calling things like Ruby Burgundy, using all these classical French names and just turning them into these generic terms for just really terrible, slightly bubbly, oftentimes co-fermented, just weird stuff.
Now, behind the scenes, there was serious scientific study being undertaken at UC Davis at this time. So there was a lot of science research being done on grape selection, site selection, mechanization in the vineyard. And so there was a retrenching that was led by UC Davis, really starting to reteach people about what grapes should be planted in what site. And so they played a critical role in ushering out eventually, despite how entertaining the advertisements might have been, ushering out this era of jug wine and moving into a resurgence.
Yeah, it's actually for the first time, like just actually scientifically focused on like what grape varieties should we be growing where, because so much was lost, and they were really building from scratch and using a very distinctly scientific model, which was very different than what anyone else was doing in the world. And they did so much good. Now you can point out like, oh, they missed this and they missed that and they did this wrong. Doesn't matter. This is the building block. Science is the building block of the wine industry in California and in America. And that's unusual. Everyone else starts with monks. We start with scientists. But also just really creative, interesting people. And I'm going to call like a couple of wineries that were consistently still making great wines through this era. One was Inglenook. And now this is a name that if you even hear about it, you think jug wine, because eventually the name Inglenook was sold off for jug wines. However, this was such a great vineyard, such an important vineyard, that one dude spent his entire life rebuilding the original vineyards and eventually buying the name Inglenook back. These vineyards, these were owned by so many different, some of the top wineries in Napa Valley. Things like Dominus was actually produced from these vines, and it was split off by dozen. He bought them all. He's this guy that no one's ever heard of. There's this movie called The Godfather. It didn't do much. Indie, very, 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 Francis Ford Coppola. But he actually used his earnings. Much of his entire life was spent rebuilding this vineyard, and everything that Francis Ford Coppola winery, everything all comes to that. So that's how important this vineyard was. It produces now amazing Cabernet, but at the beginning, actually, at this time, in this early part of fine wine, they were making Charbonneau, this old ancient variety that really doesn't exist anymore in California. If anyone wants to hear a conversation about Charbonneau that goes on too long, I actually interview Tom Gamble in last season. It's a fantastic interview, but I knew if I wanted to have a good conversation with him, I'm going to bring up Charbonneau. And sure enough, every winemaker in Northern California loves this grape, but we talk about it because it's something we don't have anymore.
Yes, and so by the 1950s, we have glimmers of what Napa would become.
Yes.
And we also still have on the scene the Gallo winery. And,
you
know, it's very easy to put Gallo down. Obviously, they're a big corporation. A statistic I heard once was that at least at one point in recent history, they were producing more wine than the entire country of Portugal. So they, by the 1950s, had 25% of American wine market share. So they were a huge player, and they were also very technology minded as well. So they funded a lot of the innovations that UC Davis pioneered.
Oh, absolutely. They funded, they were the bulwark, and everyone can make fun of Gallo. Like you can, and you shouldn't, because like they are a beloved company for their employees. And for that alone, I have a lot of respect, but also their technology, even now, like they have been the forerunner now, and their technology is insane. Like walking in, they're the only winery I've ever walked into one of their facilities. I looked at, I didn't understand everything. Like they had fermenters that were not static, but that actually rotated, right? They were just massive, like, these are like, we're talking tons of fruit rotating to actually make sure that the cap actually always stays wet. And like, it's futuristic. Like they are a brilliant family run company. A lot of respect for them. So, you don't have to go buy their wines. I don't buy their wines, but you walk by and you go like, respect. Yeah.
Thanks. You just shot that potential sponsor
down. Sorry, Gallo. We'll never. Because that's the thing is, running a wine school means I never show any corporate wines. Wines like that are beautiful and amazing, but they are not what I want to show. I need to show authentic wines, not successful wines. That's just, but hey, they're successful. Respect. Now, what comes next is they're building a platform where Napa starts to rise. And a couple people here that really matter. First off, Mondavi. You got to talk about Mondavi because Robert Mondavi, himself, what he does, he's a marketing genius. And everyone says that, and it's true. Like, for instance, Sauvignon Blanc. Everyone loves it now, but back in the day, back in the 60s, nobody liked it. I mean, everyone grew it. It was a common grape grown in California. Everybody disliked it. Wouldn't sell. So what Mondavi did was they actually started looking at what the French do. They looked specifically at Fumé, which was oftentimes at that era aged with a little bit of oak and a little bit of malolactic fermentation. So a little softer, a little creamier, a little bit more spice. And so they borrowed that and they took it like California always does, made it even more oak aged, more new oak, more mallow, richer, creamier, spicier, more unctuous. And he rebranded it. Mondavi rebranded it as Fumé Blanc. And Fumé Blanc was a stellar success. Today, you don't find it nearly as much. Only a few people still produce it, but that was the marketing zeitgeist, marketing train that just ran through America. And it really made Mondavi's name, their winery. That was their biggest seller for a very long time. But then you also have Telechef. How close was I?
That was great,
okay.
Actually. That was excellent.
So Andrei Telechef got that whole thing right. Thank God. He is the guy, and he's working for BV. And he's the guy who really brings the whole idea of modern winemaking into the winery itself. Everything before this point was a little messy. Davis is working hard to get things planted in science, but that's different. That's the classroom. That's in the vineyard. Telechef brings it into the winery itself. One of the biggest innovations is cold stabilization. This may sound boring because it is. Cold stabilization is not sexy, but it is essential to winemaking. It is one of the critical modern steps, something that hadn't happened before, now always happens, is cold stabilization. He also introduces not just bringing barrels in, but actually new barrels and cleanliness. He brings in sanitization into wines, into BV. And what you have is a completely new flavor of wine. Because a lot of wines before here, a lot of our flavor profiles were not clean. They were not clear. They were not precise like we expect today. Like you would have a little bit of vinegar note. You would have a little diacetyl. You would have more volatile acids. You would have funky weirdness from bacteria from old barrels that weren't properly sanitized. He is the guy who, if it wasn't for him, you would probably not love wines like you do. You'd probably be drinking beer right now if it wasn't for him. So yeah.
We have Andrei Telechef actually to thank for the victory in the Judgment of Paris.
Yes.
So this is the next seminal event in California wine lore. Everybody knows the Judgment of Paris. We've talked about it before on this wine podcast. But basically we had this great matchup in Paris in 1976 among wines from the best of France and the best of Napa, as judged by French wine judges. And they scored the Napa wines much higher than the French wines. And so Napa wine was an underdog and overnight became a superstar. And the two wineries that everybody knows from this famous battle are Chateau Montelena. Mike Gierich was the winemaker there, and Stag's Leap. And Warren Winiarski was the winemaker at Stag's Leap. Both of these gentlemen were mentored by Telechef.
And they mentored more. It was like if you track that family tree of knowledge and of mentorship, it just goes all the way to today. I mean, it is just everybody was touched by them. Not in a bad way, in a good way. Now, it was such an important moment. It was actually these people that makes Napa. That makes all of our wine in America, actually. That's our origin.
Absolutely. Now, I thought you were going to mention, Keith.
Oh?
Judgment of Paris. There was a famous movie.
Oh, okay. Oh, you're goading me now.
Yeah.
Oh, I was not going to talk about this. All right. Okay. Old Man Ranhat goes on. All right. Let's do this. So there's a movie called Bottle Shock. The problem was it was all about the Judgment of Paris. And unfortunately, none of it was really true. I mean, they wrote out an entire winemaker out of it. And also the whole idea was that there's a problem with the wines that they had bottle shock, which you get. This is a real thing that happens. When you're bottling, you're doing it without oxygen, and you have, back then, maybe CO2, but now these days we use argon. So you inject the wine in a stream with inert gas. Now that gas ends up being embedded within the wine itself, pressurized, and eventually leaches out, and not a big deal. But if you actually open that bottle right after it was bottled, it's going to taste weird. Unless you swirl the wine, and then that evaporates. But so they made this as if this was a huge problem, and oh no, the wines are ruined. None of that happened. And I'll always resent and regret this movie because of that.
But at this point, you see Napa wine making its way into the popular culture.
Yes,
and
big time.
So people were dazzled by the lifestyles.
Absolutely.
Real estate prices went through the roof. These wines became associated with luxury, Wall Street bonuses, Gordon Gekko. Wines are going for hundreds of dollars a bottle. Allocations from wineries are big business.
Yep.
It's very glamorous. It's
It
very
is.
Hollywood. And of course, there's a lot of infighting that starts happening at this time. One of the most famous battles, literally fisticuffs between brothers, occurs. Robert and Peter Mondavi, they literally come to blows over the future of their winery. And if you're interested, it's a bit gossipy, but it's delicious fun. The House of Mondavi is a great book. And actually, as we were talking earlier,
Oh, yes.
we started thinking about the soap opera Falcon Crest and looking it up. And in fact, it was inspired by the Mondavi family and other high-profile winemaking families in Napa Valley. It was called Tuscany Valley in the drama series at that time. But this is really where Napa cements itself as a fairy tale storybook kind of place.
Because it goes from like this backwater in the 70s to the 80s. Like it just was like a decade later, and all of a sudden you have like this nighttime soapy, I think CBS, big budget TV show. Yeah, like the idea of wine and winemaking in America went from just this very blue collar to incredibly fancy. Yeah, but there were other things happening. There's other places in Northern California that are doing incredible things. Like, for instance, Martin Ray in Santa Cruz Mountains is doing insanely beautiful wines. Now, there is actually a Martin Ray winery now. It has nothing to do with the original, but back then, he was making wines in Santa Cruz Mountains. This is insane. Like, you know how high up though they are and how impossible it is to harvest, but he did, and his wines were famous, beloved at that time. So it isn't just Napa. There's other things that were really magical happening up in Northern California. So this boom just begets another boom. Now we went from big Falcon Crest now to Mondavi, and now we are actually now going to the stratosphere, a place that no wine region in America ever has been in. And this starts with Robert Parker. We talked about him before. Now, it's not just we have wines that are $100, $200. Now, we have wines like Staglin and many others that you can't get. You can't buy them. They are allocated now. And so maybe you have to go to the winery, and maybe, just maybe, they'll put you on the wait list. And maybe you have to buy all their wines just to get the wines you actually want. And maybe you have to buy them consistently year after year to get the ones you really want. And so this becomes this ladder, and it doesn't matter. You can be as rich as Midas, and you cannot get these wines. Like Screaming Eagle, right? How many of you have ever had it, right? But now we're at the stage of such exclusivity. This is no longer about the wine. It's actually about class. It's actually about hierarchy. It's actually about having things that no one else could possibly ever have. It's kind of like drinking DRC at a basketball game, right? That's this level. Like, I can do this. I'm not enjoying it, but no one else could possibly do this.
And so in steps the rise of the wine snob.
Yes. Oh, yes. And here we move. Are you going to talk about, are you going to bring in Sideways?
Absolutely. I'm going to bring in Sideways.
Good.
It's something that younger people, God bless, have not heard of.
Oh,
but it is still so relevant in the wine industry. So this was the iconic movie from 2004.
Yes.
Featuring Paul Giamatti in a standout performance, but his female co-stars, I think, are much better. Sandra Oh, Virginia Madsen, iconic, great performances.
Beautiful.
Love them. But what this movie taught all American wine drinkers was that you should love Pinot Noir and hate Merlot.
Yes.
And it truly had a devastating effect on Merlot wine sales, the rise of Pinot Noir, which we have seen to this day.
I saw it actually at the premiere. And like I had just started the school only a couple years before the wine school. And I had just come out of winemaking. Now I'm teaching and I'm watching this movie. And I hate this movie. I mean, he steals from his mom. And then, this whole anti-Merlot thing. And then it's weird because at the end of the movie, he's drinking Cheval Blanc, which is actually partly Merlot. And he loves Pinot Noir. So why isn't his favorite wine Pinot Noir? I had a lot of questions at the end of the movie. And I did. But that caught on so fast with Merlot sales drop. And Pinot rise. Because that was completely unexpected because, to be honest, the American palate is much closer to like Cabernet and Merlot and not Pinot. And actually, from that point on, when we started running academic programs at the school, I actually had to make sure that people understand the genetic similarities and the flavor similarities between Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot, because Americans all of a sudden had this bad idea, really bad idea, that somehow Merlot is like this cheap wine, easy drinking, and Cabernet Sauvignon is this magnificent, beautiful wine. And they just did not have an understanding that, no, these two grapes are typically blended. They're so close together that oftentimes people, when you taste them blind, if they're made in the same way, you can't tell them apart. So all of that to say, oh my God, yeah, this was a massive change in wine. And I am glad that people, young folks, don't actually know this movie. So here we are, right? California, especially Northern California. What's actually happening is the rest of Americans' wine regions are starting to actually rise up as well. The whole idea of local agriculture, that was really big about a decade ago, and it kind of faded out. But the thing is, it didn't fade out in the wine industry. The wine industry took that and they said yes. So the wave now is actually seeing these really high-end wines and beautiful wines coming out of places like the Finger Lakes. I mean, where else are you going to find an $80 bottle of Riesling that actually is worth it? You're starting to see things in Virginia, like insanely great Cabernets coming out of Virginia that are commanding $200 a bottle. You're seeing things like this, like Gruner coming out of Pennsylvania. We're seeing such amazing things that, while California is always going to be the star, right? We're always going to look towards Northern California, Napa and Sonoma. But what's happening now is there's a rise around the country. So the story of Napa and Sonoma and California is not over, but now they have competition. And I'm really looking forward to like the next decade of wine.
Me too, Keith. Absolutely.
And so, folks, if you enjoyed this, we want you to like and subscribe. Please. Does a lot for us. Also, if you're into wine, you want to learn more, you actually want to earn your sommelier certification, you actually want to have a legit education, check out the National Wine School at wineschool.us. But also, you can visit us.
Yes, visit us if you're in the Philadelphia area. Please come and see us for a class at the Wine School of Philadelphia, where Keith and myself teach full-time. And also check out our video podcast of this podcast. You can find it on YouTube at Wine School USA. And next time, we will be talking about forgotten grapes and forgotten regions.
Oh, that's great.
Cheers.